Good, okay. So welcome everyone, this is session CLI 305. This is AppV Notes from the Field. My name is Justin Zarb, I am from the UK, one of your close neighbourhood friends over there. Just to give you a bit of background on myself, I live over in the UK in a place called Greenwich. This is where I've been born and raised pretty much all my life. And I was asked by a chap called Leon Booth over in Australia to come over to TechEd Oz and TechEd New Zealand to come and speak about AppV. So I cover AppV for EMEA. And EMEA is a big place. It's pretty much half the world. And I go to lots of different countries over and over and over again to talk about the benefits of AppV and how to deploy it right and what to do when you're in a bit of a dilemma, when something's gone wrong. And so coming over to Australia was quite a big thing for me because I'd never been there and I didn't realise that Australia was such a big place. So, you know, it's huge compared to the UK. But what I also didn't realise, and when I got to New Zealand, I did a Bing search and I didn't realise that New Zealand was such a big place, even bigger than Australia. I thought it was amazing when I came over here. No wonder you guys are so good at your rugby. So the thing about the UK is there's a few things that we absolutely love and we absolutely adore. So one of them is our tea. You know, whenever you always hear about the Poms or the English, you always hear about us drinking tea, and I love tea. And as long as you guys have English tea over here, so I was very, very happy. The other thing about England, which a lot of people understand or know about, is our sense of humour. Apparently we're quite sarcastic and we have a very dry wit, and hopefully we'll have some of that sort of humour today in the session. The other big thing that people tend to recognise the UK about is Top Gear and driving fast and blowing up things and anything quite entertaining around the whole Top Gear piece. The other thing that I absolutely love, and I've been brought up all my life, is in rugby. I love rugby. You can talk to me about rugby all day and I'll have a great time with you. And I love watching New Zealand play. It's absolutely fantastic to watch, except when you're in the semi-finals against them and get a little bit run over. But, you know, the good thing about New Zealand is that you haven't won since 1987. The other good thing about that is, and I always like to say to any of my Kiwi mates, was that South Africa wasn't in that World Cup. So you got away with it on that one. But what I like even more is that we've won it since, and we've got to the finals the last two times, and hopefully this time in New Zealand you'll see a poor England performance all the way through to get to the final again. So I jumped on an A380 to come over here to Australia and New Zealand, and it's a long way. So it's a big long trip around the world to get down to New Zealand. So it's pretty much halfway round for us. And this is my wife. This is my wife Natalie. Now, when I found out about TechEd Australia and New Zealand, I basically got told you can come along, and I thought, great, this is brilliant. But what I didn't realise was the dates. So when I found out about the dates, being the typical man that I am, I went and saw my wife and said, this is fantastic, been asked to go out there. And her face dropped. And I thought, oh my God, I've just put my foot in it. And what I didn't realise was that it was our first year wedding anniversary that just went past on Sunday. So my wife turned red with anger and got really cross with me. But I knew that I had to come out here because I love talking around AppV. Just to tell the happy end, I actually ended up, after being bashed around for a little while, bringing my wife out. There's us and there's New Zealand in the background, and we've had a great time in this place ever since. So it's been fab to have the first year wedding anniversary out here. So New Zealand's always going to have a strong sort of feel to our lives. So the whole reason I'm here today is to talk about AppV, and it's talking about notes from the field, talking about things that I've seen from a day-to-day experience using AppV. I want to talk about things that will stop you from having pain when you deploy it. I'm in a department called PFE. We're all about being proactive. We don't like to see customers deploy stuff and then run into issues. There's another section of the business called the GTSC, and they're all the people that you phone up when you do have a problem. But I like to make sure you never have to phone them up, that you always have a good experience. So I want to cover off some of the planning, process and operation steps in deploying AppV. I also want to just let you all know that this is totally interactive, so please feel free to throw your hand up and ask questions all the way along this session. What we tend to see when we go out there, or customers are deploying AppV, is that customers want faster application delivery. They want to be able to stabilize their core platform and get a really strong SOE experience. They want to basically remediate app conflicts and not have the pain when they go out there and deploy applications. They want to be able to upgrade their applications on demand, and they just really want to reduce the whole issues around deploying applications into their environment. A quick question around this. Who here has AppV today? So it's about, what's that? That's less than a third. It's less than a quarter, actually. Who here has played with AppV? Again, just a little bit more about that. Who here has even seen anything about AppV? Oh, that's really quite small numbers. So hopefully we're going to go through and we're going to show you some of the things around AppV, build up a bigger picture for you and how to use the product. Now, inside Microsoft, you'd never believe it, but we actually get, we start to basically categorize all of our issues and all of our problems when they get raised. And one of the things that we categorize are things around planning. So you've raised a support ticket, you've raised an issue to Microsoft, and it's actually been down to either things that you've missed off on the planning stage or inaccuracies when you have gone to deploy it in your production environment. Now, planning is important, and when you come to plan, you need to start thinking about a number of different aspects. What is it you're trying to achieve? Are you trying to do user-based targeting? Who here does user-based targeting in their organization? Very small amount. Who here does computer-based targeting? Who here uses a combination of both? What about TS? Who's got TS in their environment? Who's just a pure desktop house? Oh, just one at the back. What about VDI? Who uses VDI here? What about locations? Who's got loads of locations out there? Oh, plus 10. Oh, tons of you. And you also have to understand some of the limitations with the product as well. So AppV is fantastic. I use it every day. I think it's the best thing that Microsoft's ever deployed out there. But you also have to understand the good and the bad. You also have to understand the sweet and the sour with the product. So planning is often done without taking into account of all of the information and the facts. And I see that more often than not. And there's a significant number of calls generated by Microsoft around this. So I want to start off talking about the AppV full infrastructure. And really, I tend to talk about Microsoft AppV deployments in three distinct groups. We have an AppV full infrastructure, and this is based around user-based targeting. A user logs on, they get a policy sent down to them, and then they click on a shortcut and the application streams down to them on demand. There's a standalone methodology, and this standalone methodology basically says, I'm going to create a virtual application, and then what I'm going to have is I'm going to have a client distributed to my laptops, and I'm not going to require any infrastructure. And I'm just going to deploy that application that we packaged up straight to this machine. So you can use this in conjunction with one of your third-party ESD solutions or SMS 2003. And then we've got integration with SCCM R2. And in SCCM R2, AppV applications are treated as native apps. So they're not a second-class citizen. They're there out of the box, and you can integrate straight away with SCCM. So the first focus that we're going to have a discussion around is around the AppV full infrastructure. Now, one of the things that we get asked around is how do I size this environment correctly? And when you start going through and you start doing your planning and you start doing your sort of analysis on AppV and using AppV, a lot of questions come up about how big should my infrastructure be? How many servers should I need? How much should I be taking into consideration? And this server sizing guide gives you information about a thing called publish and refresh, which we're going to go and discuss in a second, and information about streaming applications and using different protocols. So rather than you going out there and thinking, you know what, I need 8 servers and just plucking it out of thin air, you can actually use this information, the server sizing guide, to get that understanding and get that information. So the first thing that I really want to highlight in this server sizing guide is a thing called publish and refresh. Who here knows what publish and refresh is? And who here doesn't know what publish and refresh is? Perfect. So let's flip over to our lovely little server over here. So here we have an AppV full infrastructure server. And in this server, we can basically load in a number of different applications that we want to deliver out there to our environment. Now, I haven't gone through the sequencing process. That's basically a way of taking your standard application, packaging that up into a virtual application, and delivering it into full infrastructure. There are several separate sessions around that. So please do attend those if you get the opportunity. Now, in this environment, I basically pre-populated a number of applications. So I've got Office 2010 x86, Office 2010 x64, Office Communicator, the next release, Outlook Social Connector, Power Pivot, Snagit, a number of different applications. And what happens is when my user goes over to his desktop client and logs in, we go through and we log on and we basically build up what applications the user should have access to. So when I log on, we do a thing called publish and refresh. And essentially what publish and refresh is if I come here and right-click on this shortcut and hit refresh applications, that triggers the publish and refresh. And what happens is this client goes off, speaks to the server, says, server, what application, here's my Kerberos token, here's my ticket for joining the domain. What applications do I have access to? We then do a SID GUID mapping in the AppV database, see what access permissions that user has against the applications in the database, build up a file called applist.xml, and send that file back to the user's workstation. And that happens as the user logs on. It can be initiated separately, but it happens as the user logs on. When the user then logs on, they go to their start menu, and they see their applications they have access to. So here, Office 2010 x86. If I click on the application, you'll see in the bottom right-hand corner, Office executes and it launches. So that's all getting done. Or that's publish and refresh streamed down to me. But let's add to this. Let's add to this and show you that publish and refresh in a bit bigger light. So I haven't got Office x64. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go into Active Directory. I'm going to find my Microsoft Office 2010 x64 security group. I'm going to add my user to this security group. I'm now going to go back to my client. And remember, in the start menu, I have no Microsoft Office x64. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to initiate a publish and refresh. Now, this could be a log on, log off, but I don't like doing that. I don't like wasting my time logging off and logging in. I just want to right-click and just hit, say, refresh. And then if I go back to my start menu, I see Office x64. And I can then start executing Microsoft Office x64 straight away. So I don't have to log on. I don't have to wait for a deployment. It's just streamed down to me on demand. But the whole process of that publish and refresh is literally just building up that list of applications which I need or which I have access to. That's pretty cool, eh? You don't have to wait around, no messing around for applications to be delivered down to a user. So with this in mind, we then start getting questions. How many management servers, how many centralized servers do I need to allow my users to perform this publish and refresh? Surely it's going to hit my server load all of the time. Well, every time a user logs on or every time they initiate a publish and refresh, it does take a hit to the server. But that hit is actually very, very small. It's 1.2% of the CPU load on a 2K8 box, 0.21 megs in memory, and 0.42 in network load. And essentially, we can handle up to 8,500 refreshes per minute. So that's on Windows Server 2008. So if we take about this for 2003, that's 8,000 refreshes per minute, and there's 60 minutes in an hour. So essentially, I could have 480,000 publishing refreshes per hour. So that's the process of just going back and finding out what applications I have access to. On Server 2008, that's 8,500 refreshes per minute, and then over a 60-minute period, I could take into account 510,000 publishing refreshes per minute. Now, by default, out of the box, publish and refresh takes place at user logon. So unless the user is initiating that refresh, it's actually going to take place at logon. How many people here have over 510,000 clients in their estate? How many people here have more than 50,000 clients in their estate? How many have less than 50,000 in their estate? So that's everyone, basically. So as you can see, we can get some real good scalability results out of these management servers. On top of that, we have things called package load. And this is a package load is basically, when I click on a shortcut, what basically happens at the bottom right-hand corner is I try and stream the application from our management server down to my local client. And when I stream it from this management server into my local client, it's all of that data, all of that application data then stays persistent on my platform. So I don't have to stream any more bits or any more data. Once it's streamed down, it stays there static, and it doesn't get updated unless I need any more, or I upgrade the package. Now again with this, and when we are loading or streaming applications down, it's a very small footprint we have on the servers. So again, for 2008, using RTSP, and RTSP is one of many streaming protocols we can use. Again, the CPU load is very, very small. Likewise, the memory usage is 0.1 of a meg, and network bandwidth is 1 meg network bandwidth. And again, if you change your streaming protocol from RTSP to HTTP, you can get even more performance benefits using that methodology. So by default, out of the box, we use the RTSP protocol. I'll just quickly go over to the server and show you. So by default, out of the box, we use this protocol. And what you'll see under the AppV management console, if I just bring that open again, under server groups, we basically list out all of our servers that we have access to. And here you can specify the ports that are used. And by default, I've actually set port 554. However, if you didn't want to use port 554 for streaming, you can change how you stream applications to your clients. So you can use RTSP or RTSPS. That's just the secure methodology. If you have IIS servers in your environment, you can enable them for streaming. So you can just enable a standard IIS server in your estate to do HTTP or HTTPS streaming. And that literally is as simple as going into IIS, adding a virtual directory under IIS. So here you go, I've got one called content, and that's got all of my data in there. And then just add in a couple of MIME types. And what I add a MIME type for is .osd and also .sft. And this allows us to start streaming using HTTP. So now if you've got multiple, if you want multiple servers just to deliver streaming content, you can leverage your existing IIS infrastructure. But not only that, you can actually use SMB as well. And you can use your standard file shares to stream applications to your workstations also. So you have loads of different options, loads of different protocol options that you can leverage in your environment to use, to take into account streaming. Now, one of the other things that I also get a number of questions around is around upgrades. Now, in AppV, we have this whole thing called active upgrades. Essentially, what happens is, say we've got Office 2010, and I want Office 2010 with Service Pack 1. So I take my existing Office 2010 package, I put it back into the sequencer, I open it for upgrade, and then I apply Service Pack 1 to it. I can then add that application back into my infrastructure with Service Pack 1 in there, and then the next time my client sees that my application's been upgraded, it will stream down the required changes for Service Pack 1. So a really nice, easy methodology, really nice way of just upgrading applications and application data for your environment. A question I tend to get asked, though, is surely upgrades are only supported using RTSP. And that's just not the case. Upgrades are supported using any protocol in AppV. So if your environment wanted to use file streaming, that's standard SMB streaming, if you wanted to use HTTP or HTTPS or RTSP, RTSPS, you can do, and you can get all of the benefits of upgrading packages in your environment. So the other big thing that I wanted to highlight is that we actually have a group policy ADM template. Now, we've also, again, got a white paper around this, and it's a free download on the Download Center to download this group policy ADM template, and it's been recently upgraded to take into account AppV 4.6. It offers you a number of benefits. So it offers you things like centralized management. You can basically set all of your AppV client permissions from that central site. You can change the way that the interface behavior looks. So if you want that little blue bar shown in the bottom right-hand corner, you can enable that. If you don't want it there, you can just hide that as well. And it also allows us to change things like the communication settings. Now, a number of you said that you have multiple branches or multiple sites out there in your environment. Now, AppV is great for streaming, and it seems great in a single site environment. But actually, what we can do is we can put streaming servers in your branch offices. And based on the group policy for the client, we can actually say to the client machine, rather than traverse the WAN and go and stream applications from our central site, just go and stream from that IIS server or that SMB share on the network. And I'll go into that a little bit later. And we also have group policy preferences. Now, group policy preferences also give us the ability to make very granular registry changes to the platform. So we can do things like create shortcuts for specific applications or even change individual registry keys that we actually don't have in the ADM template. And if you've never used group policy preferences, and out of interest here, who's even heard of group policy preferences? Oh, perfect. You guys are fab. Absolutely, what a great audience. If you've never, please do look at using those in certain scenarios. And also consider deploying the client with the core settings. And what I mean by this is that we've actually got a command line interface that are both the setup.exe and also the MSI that we deploy out there. And one thing that we tend to recommend is deploy the client with the settings that you want set on the client operating system. So if you've got a specific streaming server, if you've got a specific methodology you want the applications to load down, you can set that all using the command line interface for the deployment. And then just use group policy to maintain it and update it over time. Now, just to show you the ADM template, here's my GPMC. I've just applied a few policies at the very root. And what I've imported is I've imported the ADM template. And if you use Windows Server 2008 or 2008 R2, it's actually going to sit under the classical admin template. And there are two templates depending on whether you've got 32-bit app-v clients out there or 64-bit app-v clients out there. And as I said, you can change the communication for your clients. So you can basically set different targets for it to stream from, whether the applications, once you have streamed them down, or stream down the first feature block, whether you want the rest of that package to come down and load into cache. Or if you only want applications that users have actually previously used to get streamed down into to the local client machine. So there's lots of different settings that you can set for this group policy. It's funny because I go to lots of different customers and lots of different clients, and they don't even know that this group policy even exists, and they tend to spend a lot of their time creating one or trying to adapt one for their own needs. So just be aware that that is there. We also have another white paper. Oh, question at the back? So you can't control the cache size from that. We actually released a resource kit tool that modifies and manipulates the cache size. So I've actually got a blog post around that, believe it or not. And at the end of the session, come and grab me, and I'll direct you to that exact location as well. So great question, by the way. So the question was, can you change or modify the cache size from the group policy? And the answer is no, not from our group policy, but from a tool. Yep. Do we plan to support Internet Explorer 6? Oh, if I had a dollar. If I had a dollar. So what I'd probably say is come and see us after. There's no plans to support it at this moment in time. The reason is it's part of the base operating system, and there's a heavy number of other reasons why we don't do it at this moment. Any other questions? Ace. So the next white paper I wanted to direct you to is the app-v application publishing and client interaction white paper. Now, the app-v client is a very, very simple client. We're just basically a filter driver. And we intercept calls down to the operating system. And we also basically are a big namespace handler for Windows. So essentially, we don't have conflicting files, conflicting registry items, conflicting calls to different applications across different virtual applications. Now, this white paper goes into a lot of details around how that client actually works. But it also gives you details around the caches that are on the platform. And there's more than one app-v cache. There's more than one central cache. But there's a number of user caches on a client machine. And those user caches basically have state changes for the application. So when I go through and I do this thing called sequence and I create my golden application and then I deliver that down to my user's workstation, it's been delivered in a specific way. But when my users start manipulating and changing the application, we basically write those changes to a specific file. Or what I would say is a set of specific files. And depending on whether it's a user that's changed the user data or it's the system that's changed data, we will write to one of these files. Now, just again, to give you another example of this, let's go back down to my client workstation. So just to fire up Word x86, and straight away in Word x86, one of the things you'll notice straight away is that my ribbon is actually black. And I've changed it black. This was something that I modified because I just prefer to separate what's x86 and what's x64. But say I've done something more stupid. Say I've done something more sinister. Say I've gone into my application, I've made a load of changes, and all of those changes have essentially broken the application. What I can actually do is I can actually end up going to the user's app data, and under Software Client, you're going to see basically the package root name and the GUID associated for the package that you've created. Now here I've got Office x64 and I've also got Office x86. And what I've got is this PKG file. Now this PKG file essentially, if I just close this application down, what this PKG file has is it has all of my manipulations, all of my changes that I've made to my golden state of my application. So things like the black border in the ribbon, it's got those changes in. So if I'm not satisfied or if I've broken my application and I want to get my end users back to their default installation, I can either just rename it or delete it, go back to Word, execute Word, and it's back to its default install. Prompting me for my username, prompting me basically for all of my settings at the very beginning. So to get people back to their default setup, the default installation, those PKG files, those state changes are key to be kept in those volume files. The other key piece that we have is we have this thing called a sequencer, the sequencer. And what a sequencer is your gateway to virtualization. That's the tool that you're going to use to take your X's, your MSIs, your robo-copied applications and turn it into these lovely virtual applications that you can deliver to the clients. Now, this sequencing white paper, I would say, is the best bedtime read and the best saving that you're going to have for support calls to Microsoft. If you read this, you'll understand how applications are built up, how virtual applications are pieced together, what the best practice was for my core config. And it also helps you to identify what are our limitations. Things like boot time services we don't capture. Things like drivers on the base operating system, we don't virtualize those. Things like licensing enforcements to an application, if it's bound to the network card or for a particular platform, we don't look to virtualize those things or help virtualize those aspects. So understanding those requirements or understanding those limitations are really key. So please do review the sequencing white paper. So that's it. You've gone through, you've got all the information. You spent the last week going through white papers, understanding all of our pros and all of our cons. But now you come to the deployment. And as I say, with deployment, I tend to try and get people to automate things as much as possible. Because if you can automate it, it's a repeatable process. And now there are several items that we can automate using in AppV. So in AppV, we have a back-end SQL database. We have a server installation or a server deployment. And we have a client distribution that goes out there. Now this, remember, is taking into account the full infrastructure model. We have, in most cases or in most organizations, they tend to separate out their AppV admins with their SQL admins. Who here is a SQL admin in their environment? 2. If I was an AppV admin and I said to you I wanted SA rights to your SQL database or your SQL service, what would you generally say to me? And that's generally the case. So what we ended up doing was we ended up creating a way that can be command line driven and a repeatable solution for the SQL admins to deliver the AppV SQL database. So when you're going off to deploy your very first environment, your very first AppV install, the SQL admins can deploy this out using this methodology, and then the AppV admins can go ahead and deploy the server infrastructure to connect to that SQL database. We also have a methodology for deploying out the server via the command line. And this has been super handy for a number of our customers. And for some customers, what they're actually doing is, dependent on the load or dependent on the workload in their environment, they're spinning up more management servers and then retracting those management servers in the environment based on demand. Now, for the server platform, we can also automate the deployment of the server installation for AppV. And here's a number of our command lines up there. This is generally what our command line string looks like, and it is just a standard MSI exe command line. So essentially, it's just basically calling out our server installations, a set of parameters, and how we're actually going to deploy this and what we're going to point to. So again, why is this important? Well, remember what I said to you earlier, is that you in your environment may have a large number of load that takes place, and you want to quickly, rapidly deploy out a new server out there to take that load in. Or you may want to look at deploying more servers to your branch office environments. Now, in AppV before 4.5, we only had one real methodology for deploying AppV full infrastructures, and that was this scenario for a branch office. A user would log on, and when the user would log on, he would send his token up to the management servers. The management servers would query the SQL database, and then the management servers would build up this file called applist.xml. Applist.xml then gets sent down to the user. And what's inside applist.xml is essentially an XML file that says, here are some of your pointers to your files that are required to make this virtual application work. There's a number of files called OSD files, which are basically the way that we execute our virtual applications. And there are a number of things called icon files. And those icon files give me my lovely little logo for Word 2010 on my desktop and shortcuts. So we go off and we retrieve those from our centralized servers. And they come down. And once they're down, my user can go along and execute Word 2010, because it's got the lovely little icon there. It's got the backend OSD file to execute against. And then we'll stream this SFT file down to the user's workstation. And we'll stream feature block 1 up first, so that could be anything up to 20% of the application. And then if the user requires any more bits, he'll make out-of-sequence requests to the server and stream them down to his local platform. So we got told by a number of customers, this is bad for us. We don't want to be streaming over our 2 meg WAN link. As soon as more than 10 people try and stream down these 2 gig files, we start having pain. So we went back and we thought about this, and we took this into consideration. And we brought together this branch office solution. Now remember, your streaming server could be a standard IIS box, it could be an SMB box in your environment, it could be an RTSP box in your environment. And essentially what happens now is that the user logs in, sends his token to the management server. We replicate our content, all of our files, all of the backend AppV files that we require to your streaming server. Once we do that, the user logs in, and it goes ahead and builds up applist.xml again. And we build it up for our centralized management server, the servers that are near the database. And we send that down to the user. Now this time, using our group policy template that we downloaded earlier on, we can now say to the end user's client machine, I know you're in New Zealand, and in New Zealand we've got this streaming server right next door to you. Go and grab your OSD and icon files from that streaming server. And also, when you click on one of those OSD and icon files, stream your package data from the New Zealand branch site rather than from the Seattle headquarters. So this basically allows you to have one infrastructure in your environment, be able to gather all the reporting data centrally for who's using what applications, but get all of the performance benefits around streaming from your local site using this methodology. Now, if I quickly flip back, we talked about that group policy earlier on. And inside that group policy, we have something called the application source route. The application source route is your pointer. And essentially what you can do is create a group policy, target the computers at specific sites, and say, apply this policy. And depending on what you're trying to achieve, whether you want the clients to point to a different server or a different location to stream their application down, you just literally update this group policy setting, and we will stream the SFT file from that location. We also have different ones for your OSD files and also your icon files. So you can control this based on the sites that your computer workstations are located at to make sure that they're getting the most optimized delivery mechanism in their environment. Yep. So we're talking about laptops. Yeah, so there's two. So this isn't a user-based targeting activity, so it's computer-based targeting. So if your user roaming from desktop to desktop to desktop, then the policy is going to be applied to the local machine rather than going to be applied to a user when a user logs on. So in that scenario, you would be fine. So the next same question, okay. So yeah, and also just to add on to that as well, if you do have laptops, this also supports internet-facing scenarios. So in many of in a number of the education facilities in the UK that I've been dealing with, we've been trying to basically achieve free roaming for users in the environment. But not only that, when they take their laptops home with them, they basically get access to their applications, all of their application data, and if they get provisioned new applications, they can stream them down on demand at home as well. So you can actually also do an internet-facing scenario with this solution also. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, again, it all comes down to some of the questions that you're trying to achieve. So if it's a laptop user as well, what I potentially would probably do is preload all of the applications to the user's laptop, and then they don't have to actually go back and call any other data that they require. So if they are a mobile user, then you mitigate all of those issues, or mitigate those issues with streaming. So as I say, you can use this ASR, OSR, and ISR scenario in your environment, and they basically just are overrides in the registry. And as I say, what essentially happens is that there's a path inside our OSD file that will point to a specific location for our content. And if we update that ASR location, say for a HTTP location, the final URL ends up looking like http:// New Zealand port 80 all the way to our package file. Also in app v4.6, we also have now the ability to do what's called a shared cache. Now, on every client, we have a cache file. And this cache file is called sftfs.fsd. It's located in the program data location on Windows 7. And that cache file, essentially, when you stream applications down to a workstation, that stays persistent on that platform. And what we were asked by a number of our customers in EMEA was that, well, we've got this big VDI solution. We're deploying 120,000 VDI workstations in our deployment. We don't want a 20 gig cache file in every single machine. All of the cache files are going to be exactly the same. So what we ended up doing was we ended up coming up with a solution where we could create and bake a single cache file and present that to multiple VDI images. So essentially, you could have 1,000 Windows 7 VDI platforms out there using a single 20 gig cache file in your environment. So this one comes again back down to being able to scale and scale out your VDI solutions rapidly and having all of those application data. Sure question. So it's just VDI. So the supported scenario is just VDI. So it's not being scaled out. However, we are hearing lots of demand for the RDS-TS type scenario. One of the big things that we caveat around this is that your network connection has got to be the equivalent of a disk speed, or be able to have disk I/O read writes off a local disk drive. So, but it's one of those things that we do see a lot of demand for. So the big piece around this, more than anything, is the one caveat I do say around using the 4.6 and the VDI shared cache, is that whatever you create the cache file on, the platforms that you deliver that cache file to have to be the same OS and the same architecture as well. Now that's not a bad thing also, because then you can manage your cache files depending on the platforms that your users are going to, and also because we're only taking up a small amount of data now rather than having a separate cache on each machine, we can really get some benefits here and benefits on that on the platform. The other thing we tend to see lots of issues and lots of problems around is sequencing issues. So we've seen lots of customers have problems or challenges with sequencing applications, and what we've seen is that some customers actually deploy their sequencer into their domain and have third-party agents on there. So that's things such as have your config manager agent on there. And I went into this one customer in the Netherlands, and I'll never forget it, because it was probably the funniest story I've ever got. And we were watching them sequence applications. We do this thing called AppV Health Check. It's essentially, I turn up on site, I run a number of diagnostics tools. I say to you, are your AppV environments healthy or your AppV environments unhealthy? And one of the processes of that whole task is basically to watch you sequence a package, watch you sequence an application to see it's done to the most optimized level. Now, when I turned up at this customer, they were using Ghost to revert their sequencing machine back. So, yeah, good thumbs up there. You're always reverting your sequencing machine back. But when they started up their sequencer to capture a package, what happened in the bottom right-hand corner was that SMS kicked in. And it went, SMS is about to install an application. SMS is installing an application. SMS has completed installing an application. So I sit there and I start scratching my head thinking, did they not realize this is going on? So I asked them to do another sequence for me and revert their sequencer back. And as they bring their sequencer back up and they start monitoring again, SMS kicks in again. This is SMS is installing an application. SMS has completed installing an application. And on 70% of their applications that they looked to virtualize, they basically captured this third-party install going on. So you've just got to be really careful about what agents you install on your sequencing workstation. Make sure it complies with your best practices in your organization, but also make sure that you aren't doing anything that's compromising your sequencing activities on your machine. The other thing we tend to recommend customers creating recipes. And what we've actually got is up on the TechNet forums, there's the bottom link there, we've actually got a whole forum dedicated for creating recipes. And this is essentially the structure that we use to create the recipes on that forum. But we tend to find it's a very good methodology for customers to use so they have a clear indication of actually how this application was installed. And we see a number of customers try and install applications and actually just can't remember how it installed in the first place. You know, they've forgotten the registry fix that they needed to deploy or grab from Bob in the marketing to get this application working correctly. So having good recipes, having sound methodologies will help you not just in this current day, but when you maybe migrate to Win 7 or the next platform after Win 7. So that was the server install, and there's also around some of the stuff in the VDI piece as well. I also want to talk about the client distribution. So the client distribution has two installers. It has a setup.msi, both command line driven and CLI. Command line driven and GUI driven. And we also have a setup.exe that's GUI driven and command line driven. The setup.msi does not detect or install any prerequisites, so you've just got to be really careful about your prerequisite distributions. The setup.exe does detect those prerequisites, and it does install them for you. So again, just be careful with regards to prerequisite distributions out there in your environment. There's actually a web link here as well that will tell you what prerequisites you require. One of the things that we tend to see getting caught out with a lot of customers is Dr. Watson's. And when they go out and deploy Dr. Watson's, they just use the standard MSI that Dr. Watson's delivers. But when you deliver Dr. Watson's, you've actually got to register an app GUID associated with that. And we've got basically a framework for delivering that app GUID out there in your environment. So again, just be careful when you are deploying the clients out there that you do take into account all of the prerequisites for the client, or just stick to the setup.exe and it will do all of this for you. Who here has Config Manager? Who here has been to a Config Manager session throughout the day here today? Who here had part of that Config Manager session saying, just be careful when you activate AppV and SCCM? So absolutely true. What happens is that, so I'm just going to quickly go on to the ESD scenario to build this picture up again. You could deploy it out there AppV in your environment. You're either using it in standalone mode or you're using it in the full infrastructure. And you think, you know what? I want the best of the best. I want to use Config Manager in my environment. Now, the bigger challenge with Config Manager is, or the problem with Config Manager is, if you enable this tick box, which is under site settings under client agents, advertise program client agents, there's a tick box that says allow virtual application package advertisements to take place. And if you do that, the config manager client on the machines will basically take over the AppV client. It will basically say, right, I own you now. Let's get rid of everything in the cache. We don't want that anymore. Config manager rules, and we're going to rock you from now on. Now, the problem with that is that most customers don't want that sort of migration to take place. They've pretty much got the user estate using their AppV environment already. So inside SCCM, you have the ability to set policies. Now, in SCCM by default, the policies come from the site server. But in SCCM, policies work a little bit different to group policies. Out of the SCCM people in this room, how do policies work? Does the local policy apply over the site policy, or does the site policy always win over the local policy? So just to go into this, the local policy will always override the site policy if you enable it. So essentially, here I've got my site policy that's come down from my SCCM environment, and at the bottom there, circled in blue, it's basically saying, right, I've ticked that tick box. My virtual applications are going to be enabled from now on. SCCM is going to be taking control of my environment. What you can actually do is you can create your own custom MOF file using the SDK. And you can deliver that MOF file using something like MOFComp to an SCCM client. What I've done in this MOF file is I've modified it to an override policy. And what I've set is this virtual applications to false. So that basically means that SCCM is not going to come along and override the AppV cache on the local machine. When that policy is deployed to my client, it's set to local, and it basically shows that the local policy on my platform is virtual apps are set to false. And the overall policy, my actual resultant policy that I actually get at the end of the day, is a false policy for AppV and SCCM integration. So the piece that I really wanted to emphasize with this is that you can now look to do a really graceful migration to SCCM if you've already got AppV out there in your environment, and then if you want SCCM to manage your AppV infrastructure in the future. So this was a solution that we came up for a customer, and basically the solution was that we would go out there and create a collection, find out from that collection who's got AppV in our... Oh, yeah. So you could use it to say, basically, don't look at any of my VDI platforms, and use the AppV full infrastructure to deliver the shared cache if you wanted to. So if you want, we can go on and expand on that after. So what we actually said was do a query-based collection, find out who's got AppV out there in my environment today, who's already running with it, create this MOF file, and then advertise that MOF file to those clients, so basically they don't look to take on the SCCM advertisements for AppV. And then what we look to do is then we look to say, right, once we've got that MOF file out there and they're all in their own state and they're not using SCCM to query for AppV packages, we then look to basically track those machines. So we track them using either DCM or a query-based collection to enumerate the affected machine, or we extended WMI to basically look at the namespace for that particular attribute. So you can basically still understand what machines aren't being looked after by SCCM for AppV packages. And once we were happy with the migration for our standard SCCM clients, and then we wanted to bring our standard AppV clients that we had in existence beforehand over, what we did was we migrated all of the applications that those users had, create the relevant groups and collections in SCCM, start to advertise those packages, and then we looked to use WMI and advertisement to remove the local MOF file on the client, and then the local SCCM machine would kick in, take the advertisements that we were publishing for the applications, and deliver that down to the end user's workstation. So for those that thought there wasn't a graceful migration to SCCM, there certainly is a graceful migration out there for SCCM. Going back to operations now, and then this is some of the other bits and pieces that cause us a lot of pain in the field. So again, back to the AppV full infrastructure. We tend to talk about the basics a lot in Microsoft. So that's things like updating drivers, updating firmware, running Windows updates. So just be aware of those basics. Be aware of those basics, not just from the SQL platform, but also from your OS platform as well, making sure that you do keep up to date with the latest releases from Microsoft. The other thing is that in an AppV environment, we have this database which has all of this metadata about where all of our applications are stored. And we also have this thing called a content share. And what the content share is basically a location where all of our SFT files, all of our OSD files are stored on the network. This could also be your IIS virtual directory where all of that content is stored as well. Now, what we tend to see is that a number of customers, when they import applications into their environment, don't either have the relevant path set correctly. So hit up there, this basically generates us a 6402 error because they haven't got the relative path or UNC path to the share where the SFT file is located. Or what we see is that people delete packages or delete data from the content share and just leave the data in the AppV database, so it just sits there and gets stagnant. So keep making sure that you keep your database in sync with your content sharing, your content share in sync with your database. It's just generally good housekeeping in your environment as well. So here's another issue that we tend to see quite a lot in the field, and this is one called max memory. Now, when you deploy an AppV full infrastructure server in your environment, by default, max memory is set to 512 megs of RAM and a warm memory of 205 megs of RAM. Now, this is a situation that we had with one customer where when they deployed their AppV servers in their environment, performance all of a sudden started to get slow and clients started to time out and requests started to drop in their environment. And what we ended up doing was we ended up having a look at the memory consumption used on the platform. And what we've got in AppV is we've got a number of helper processes. They're things called dispatchers and cores. And those dispatchers and cores utilize memory. Now, what happens is, by default, the AppV management servers are set to this 512 meg limit. So if you deploy out an 8 gig server and you never go back to the management server and modify this max memory allocation limit, your server or your AppV server will never use above 512 megs of RAM on the platform. So you end up wasting 7.5 gigs off the operating system because it's just not being used whatsoever. Now, we've seen that loads. We've seen that absolutely loads. So here's an example of the customer. They went ahead, they made they had 3 gigs of RAM in their platform. They modified one server, but they had multiple servers out there in their environment. They never actually went back and changed the max memory allocation. So essentially, one of all of these servers was configured correctly, and the rest was incorrectly configured. And they were questioning and wondering why, after when a client starts to stream or starts to stream down 30 applications, why do things start to get a bit flaky in my environment? So that one's under the server groups, and then you're going to have an individual server name for each server, and then it's under the advanced tab in the management console. So with those, on the server side, we also get generated a log file, and there's a log file called SFT server.log, and that log file can be absolutely valuable to troubleshoot or understand trends in your environment. So here's an example of one of those log files, and actual fact, this is an example of the end output of those log files once we start going through them and analyzing them. So if I just quickly flip back here. So this is our server, and on our server, under C drive, program files, Microsoft Application Virtualization, that's App Compact, Microsoft System Center Application Virtualization, and then under Microsoft Management Server, let me get the right one, we have a folder called logs. And what happens is that we generate a log file for every request that comes to the server and for any issues that the server experiences or faces. Now, a couple of things. That log file just continues to grow, so just be warned, but if you are doing verbose logging using this log file, it can grow quite rapidly, very quickly. The end output for that log file tends to look a little something like, oh, that's the wrong one to open up. That's like 400 megs. Let's grab that one, which is a little bit more shrunk down. And let me kill Notepad, because Notepad will kill me first. And that's one of the reasons why I say to watch those sort of outputs, because they can grow quite rapidly, those log files. And what you don't want is a 400 meg log file to start analyzing or troubleshooting. So if I just quickly open that one again. So what ends up basically taking place is the log file looks a bit like this. And it's just a consistent set of lines with outputs around information that's taking place on the server. Now what you can do is you can take that log file and engulf it into Excel. And in Excel you can start to do funky things with this log file. So you can start to look at trending information. You can start to analyze for errors. You can analyze for problems. So things such as, does a file exist? Am I getting connected from legacy AppV clients in my environment? So you can start to understand what's working correctly in my environment and what's not working correctly in my environment. So we'll just wait for that one to kick open and open up for us. Now, whenever we go to a customer, whenever we do a health check, we, by default, just go straight for that SFT server.log file. And likewise, whenever we have a support call raised from the, in the GTSC, this is probably one of the first things we ask customers to do. So when you import it into Excel, it looks a bit like this. You basically import it and you set it to a delimited value. And when you set it to a delimited value, we basically set the log file up in a way that it can actually be structured and worked with. Now once you have that, you can then go ahead, select all of the data, and then insert that into a pivot table. And then from this, we can actually say, you know what, show me all of my errors that I'm getting, show me what severity those errors actually are, and show me how many messages I'm getting for each one of those errors. So then we can quite quickly and rapidly see what big errors, what big issues are we having on our management servers, and then we can start to look at those issues. So we can then start to say, you know what, I want to see the message for each one of these, and we can start to see what issues are actually being taking place. So for example here, we can't see or unable to open a particular package. Does that package exist on my content share? And then we can double click on those actual files and get a breakdown of the issue and a breakdown of the problem. So now you can start to use the log files a little bit more easier. They're not just a big consistent chunk of data that when I get them I go cross-eyed just because I have to look at all of this information. It's actually stuff that makes sense to me now. I can actually start to analyze and root cause and troubleshoot and find the problem. I can even break that into trends over weekly, daily, hourly issues to root cause and find and track back a problem. It might be an issue that every Wednesday at 2 in the afternoon I have a problem or I have a disconnection from the database, and then you ask your SQL team, who are sitting hiding over in the corner of the room, and they're basically running a backup or a job on the database. So it just helps identify those sort of issues. Again, on the client side, there's also a wealth of information on the AppV client, and we also have a log file called sftlog.txt. Now, sftlog.txt is very similar to the AppV sft server.log file that we just looked at. And again, this is a text file that you can analyze, put into Excel, start to manipulate, and actually get information about trends in the environment. And here's an example where on the farthest left-hand side we see the error codes. On the top of the screen we're seeing the dates, and we're seeing the trending information. What errors are occurring daily? What errors are taking place consistently in our environment? Again, from those log files, from the sftlog.txt file, you can actually pull all of those log files in and break down information on launch times on applications. How many times out there have you had a customer come to you and said, you know what, this application takes ages to start or launch? Oh, none of you? Oh, right, it just must be in EMEA. We have it all slowed down there. So now you can actually start breaking down launch times of applications. You can start to trend that information and see potentially what are the issues out there in my environment. So, for example, there was a great one about Adobe After Effects, where it was taking like 411 seconds. Is that acceptable? 411 seconds? I've gone and drunk like 3 beers down the pub and then come back into the room by that point in time. So it's starting to feel your end user's pain and try and resolve them. So we've got a log parser tool. It's part of the resource kit. Again, it's downloadable from Microsoft.com. And you basically just pass it through with a parameter and you get your output. So just to quickly show that before we wrap up for today. So here's here's the log file I did earlier. And what I did was I ended up using the log file tool, and I passed all of my information. So the standard SFT log, just to quickly show this up front, looks a bit like this. That's what it looks like. And it carries on going and 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 going. What you can actually do is you can use the log parser tool and basically get an output from that. And once you get that output from that, you can pull that information again into Excel. Again, a bit similar to what we did a little bit earlier. Once we have that, we can insert a pivot table and then get results a bit similar to this. And again, what you can do is you can do all sorts of funky analysis with this. This one was actually an analysis I did for a customer where we wanted to see the number of errors that we were getting against the various builds of AppV that we'd released in their environment. So we could actually root cause or see issues up front and see what benefits we were getting whilst upgrading the client. Another situation that we ended up doing was one around launch times, and we spoke about that one a little bit earlier on. And this is, again, another example of that, where I've grabbed the average launch times of applications, how many times I've actually seen those applications launch in my environment, and also what the standard deviation was for those application launches. Now, the reason why I tend to use standard deviation in my analysis is because it shows me the amount of skew on my data. So if I see a big number in the standard deviation, it means my data has been heavily skewed by maybe 1 or 2 results. If I see a low standard deviation, it generally means my results are consistent all the way through. But it means that I can now analyze this data really quickly to see what's good and what's bad in my environment, and then I can look to double click on one of these results and drill into my data even further. Now, I want to leave you one last piece around the AppV full infrastructure or any AppV deployment. There's a certain upgrade process that we see sometimes done in slightly different ways. And our standard upgrade process is to upgrade all of your clients first. So if you're going from AppV 4.5 to AppV 4.6 or AppV 4.6 to AppV 4.6 SP1, there's a standard upgrade procedure we tend to adhere to. And that is to upgrade all your clients first, and then your server infrastructure, and then your sequencer. What we tend to see is customers try and upgrade their sequencer first, and then over time upgrade all of their clients in their environment. Please don't do that. Please try and upgrade all your clients first, and then the rest of the infrastructure thereafter. The reason why we potentially make changes to the way we handle the virtual registry or the virtual file system in the sequencer, but the client may not be able to take into account. Whereas the client is always backwards compatible and can take into account legacy versions of the sequencer. So just take into account these bits and pieces. So hopefully from today you've learned about some of the benefits you get from planning, some of the benefits you can get from having certain processes in your environment and automation, and also some of the benefits that you can use from looking at the log files in your environment. I just want to say thank you very much. If you have any questions whatsoever, please do feel free to come and grab me outside. I'm going to be a good speaker because the crossover tie is quite bad. But I'll be just outside here on the right-hand side. And thank you very much. You've been a great audience. Thank you.